There are a few game franchises that I'll drop everything else to sink my teeth into, but the core Pokemon series is certainly one of them. I always love seeing the new Pokemon, exploring the new region, and challenging the new gym leaders and Pokemon League, and Pokemon Sword and Shield are about as exciting as ever in that respect. But if you're looking for a more meaningful mechanical evolution, or have found the most recent Pokemon games to be a little on the easy side, then Pokemon Sword and Shield will likely leave you wanting a little more. Sword and Shield are set in the Galar Region, a brand new location in the Pokemon world that takes a lot of inspiration from Great Britain. It's here that you and your friend Hop are about to take the gym challenge in the hopes of defeating the region's unbeaten champion, who just so happens to be your friend's brother. As far as stories go, Pokemon Sword and Shield is incredibly basic, even by Pokemon standards. All the tropes that you expect to be there, such as an antagonistic team and a world-threatening calamity, do show up, but they feel like they're included simply to check boxes rather than to be a proper part of the story. Instead, the focus is all on the gym challenge, which doesn't really make for a compelling narrative on its own. If it did, the game wouldn't feature any of the lore dumps that it does, making mention of apocalyptic scenarios and legendary Pokemon who don't really become relevant until the end, by which point I was ready to just beat the champion and finish the gym challenge. That's not to say that Sword and Shield don't have some neat ideas to throw around, and the way the games flesh out the actual functions and structure of the gyms as a competitive event is commendable to be sure. Truly, Sword and Shield do a remarkable job of making the gym challenge feel suitably important. From the massive stadium settings for the gym battles to the soundtrack that features heavy crowd chanting and triumphant brass, and even little touches like having a sporty uniform for these encounters, makes the gym challenge feel like an actual televised contest, which is really awesome. But beyond this, the game is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of its overall presentation. Among its highlights, Sword and Shield's soundtrack is pretty solid all round, with the aforementioned gym battle themes standing alongside the new rival battle and Team Yell themes as some of the best in the series. But these are paired with visuals that are fine at best and a little outdated at worst. There's some noticeable instances of characters popping in as you get closer to them, as well as some minor frame rate dips when you enter a battle with another trainer, but mostly the game looks okay. The setting in particular is well realized, what with its various nods to the real-world locations and landmarks that inspired the Galar region, inspirations that are evident in Sword and Shield's dialogue as well. On the topic of dialogue, Pokemon Sword and Shield features a number of cutscenes on a scale that most Pokemon games never see. Unfortunately, they can't help but feel a little bit off, as the characters feature zero voice acting of any kind. Though I'm not a fan of it, indecipherable grunts like those found in Banjo-Kazooie would probably be less awkward than the silence that they currently have. As it stands, these cutscenes just seem a little bit weird. The biggest sticking point for me, at least, is with regards to the game's current Pokédex. It only features about half the Pokemon in the entire series, which is more than enough for me, to be honest, but the legacy Pokemon who do make the cut look and sound exactly the same as they have in the previous 3D games. Honestly, if these models have been improved, then it's a negligible improvement to say the least. Which begs the question, why not just have all the Pokemon if you've got all of the models? Most of the game's attack animations have also gotten the same treatment, and while there are some new attacks with new animations, it's just a bit disappointing to see the same old robotic pivoting and bouncing with certain attacks. And while I'm venting my frustrations about old things and animations, why can we not have Pokemon walking around with us anymore? There are plenty of Pokemon models that walk around in the overworld, and you can set up a camp which shows them all wandering around with animations that get zero use elsewhere, so what's the deal? Now, beyond having a companion Pokemon to follow me around, the thing that always draws me back into a Pokemon game is the new Pokemon, of course, and Sword and Shield does have some fantastic new designs and type combos up its sleeve. The new starters, Yamper the electric corgi, Wooloo the sheep, there are plenty of designs that more than hold their own alongside classic favorites, but I'd be lying if I said there weren't some really underwhelming ones in the pack. But that's kind of par for the course, right? Pokemon has always had some less than excellent monsters on display. For every Voltorb and Klink, there's an Applin and an Alcremie, for instance. But it isn't just a new region and new Pokemon that Sword and Shield bring to the table. Alongside the tried and true rock paper scissors style of turn-based combat and the return of classic catch mechanics from the pre-Let's Go games, Pokemon Sword and Shield also introduced Dynamax and Gigantamax mechanics. You can basically turn your Pokemon into a kaiju for 3 turns, utilizing more powerful moves that often have a secondary effect. Now, this mechanic comes into play with the gym battles, though there are multiplayer raid battles that you can take part in that also allow Dynamaxing, as well as letting you team up with friends to take down these massive damage sponge Pokemon. In return for participating in these raids, you gain rewards such as experience boosting candy and one-use TRs to teach your team new moves. Now, these raid battles take place in the much touted wild area, the largest, most open zone to be found in any of the Pokemon games. It's actually made up of multiple smaller zones without any load times between them, but the first time you enter the wild area and are given full camera control to explore it, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't immediately striking. Unfortunately, I kind of hate the wild area. Not in concept, more in how it's implemented. It's great for grinding out levels against stronger Pokemon, and the raids are handy for getting items, but there just isn't all that much to warrant exploring it. Making matters worse, the majority of Pokemon found in the wild area are legacy monsters, which I'm personally not that interested in when it comes to a new Pokemon game. And the raid battles are kneecapped by absolutely awful matchmaking unless you have a friend online whose raids you can join. You're also limited to what level of Pokemon you can catch by the number of badges you've earned, which hinders the freedom that the wild area seems to want to offer. Thankfully, the game's usual elements are still mostly intact and are as fun as ever. The rock, paper, scissors turn-based battles are still fine, and I appreciate the move back to the classic style of catching wild Pokemon. Although it does feel like catch rates have been altered heavily to dissuade you from catching Pokemon of a higher level than you, which is kind of annoying more than anything. I think that the coolest change to the game's older elements is, once again, how the gym challenge is presented with specific regards to the gym missions. These are still mostly simple gym-based puzzles that were featured in the older games, but they struck me as more clever and interesting than previous puzzles in the series. They feature everything from familiar mazes to catching challenges and sheep herding, and they add a lot of personality to the region and its gyms. With that said though, featuring the wild area so prominently and calling attention to it every moment that the game gets, does the older gameplay formula a disservice by making it feel much smaller and more constricting. It doesn't help that Sword and Shield doesn't seem to feature many multi-level dungeons like those found in previous games, like the Rocket Hideout for instance, and overall the more familiar routes have much less complexity to them, which is saying something. On top of this less intricate approach to its routes, much of the game adheres really strictly to a plot timeline, where the day-night cycle just doesn't work the way that you'd expect it to, and you're often teleported from plot point to plot point, despite the game giving you a fast travel between towns very early on. To say that Pokemon Sword and Shield handholds players a bit too much is an understatement, I think. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I talk about the game constantly teleporting you to where you need to go, and little things like being unable to turn off your party's experience share not only take options away from the players, but also makes the game a cakewalk. By the end, I was ridiculously overleveled for the last hour or two, and I barely even made use of the raids, which seem to be most useful for simply leveling your party really quickly. What's the point when everyone is getting experience from every battle no matter how much you use them? Now, none of this is to say that Pokemon Sword and Shield are bad games, but there are definitely some issues with them. It doesn't help that there's not a huge amount of endgame content either. You have a questline relating to the game's legendaries and a battle tower with tougher AI trainers to take on, which is fine, but on top of a relatively short main game, it doesn't feel like a whole lot. The biggest saving grace is that, for competitive players, having Pokemon gain certain EVs or learn and forget moves has never really been easier, so there's plenty of replay value to be had there at least. With that, Pokemon Sword and Shield are mediocre. With a decent variety of new and interesting Pokemon and a refreshing approach to how the Pokemon gyms and the league itself are presented, Pokemon Sword and Shield are perfectly enjoyable Pokemon games. But it's getting to a point with the series where it's hard to ignore things like Pokemon using the same animations and models. And though they aren't massive issues, these little things tend to build up. It certainly doesn't help that new additions like the Wild Area draw attention to the restrictive and railroad nature of Sword and Shield's more traditional mechanics while failing to be implemented in any really meaningful way. Pokemon fans who are content with just another Pokemon game are likely to have a good time, just like I did. But really, that doesn't say much for the games, does it?